Whilst the majority of the Imperium's wars are fought on the ground by the Adeptus Astartes or Astra Militarum, these battles would often be lost without support from space. The Space Marines maintain their own fleets, consisting of unique classes of vessels, but they are vastly outnumbered by the vast numbers of ships that make up the Imperial Navy. This is the militant arm of the wider Imperial fleet, and perhaps the most important element of the entire Imperial war machine, but without it, humanity would not be able to defend itself from attacks among the stars or push to new frontiers, at least not at any strength. This is its tale, from its formation at the close of the Horus Heresy to the modern era, as well as a brief look at the various classes of ships, some of which are just over in that direction, patrolling the Cygnus cluster that we just left. My name is Michael for Tactica, Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. In the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, the organisation that would become the Imperial Navy was known as the Imperialis Armada. However, rather than being a separate entity, it was a subgroup within the Imperial Army, the combined name for all non-Astartes military forces. Its shipmasters, the commanders for an individual vessel, and even the masters of the fleet were subservient to the Lord Commanders of each expedition fleet, both from the Imperial Army and, of course, the Adeptus Astartes. Each regiment of the army would be assigned a ship. The Astartes still had their own vessels that they would serve on throughout their campaigns. However, when the Horus Heresy broke out, many of the Imperial army seceded from the Imperium, either with Horus or on their own. Due to the Imperialis Armada being intrinsically tied to the army, these rebellious forces had both the manpower and the maneuverability to make their rebellion stick, and it meant that the Imperium was incredibly hard to reunify in the aftermath. Just like with the Legiones Astartes being split into chapters by Robert Guilliman, the Imperial army would be separated and divided following the heresy, to ensure that one person could not wield so much power again. It is unknown who actually initiated this, but I doubt it was Guilliman, as it would have been noted in his tale. From the ashes of the army rose two new forces, the Astra Militarum and the modern Imperial Navy. No guard commander would hold authority over a navy officer, and vice versa. Though every captain's word is law on their own vessel, assumedly for the safety of all on board, they cannot command the Astra Militarum in any way, particularly in terms of military. This meant that if a regiment were to rebel, they would be trapped on a particular world or system without a fleet, and a rebellious navy would have no ground forces available to resupply or secure territory. Such an arrangement, whilst undoubtedly frustrating for the various commanders and incredibly cumbersome on numerous occasions, has likely saved many lives and served its purpose well for the past 10 millennia. The modern Imperial Navy is organised by a strict hierarchy that is far more uniform and rigid than the Imperial Guard. I won't go into the various individuals and officers on every vessel, as we may need all day just to do that, and I need to make sure these stealth generators don't overload. Just need to quickly adjust something. There we go. Each ship is led by a captain, who will answer to commodores in their respective squadrons. Above them are the admirals, who will usually lead a fleet or a battle group in an individual engagement, but when a large crusade is launched or multiple battle groups are assembled, then a high admiral will be in overall command. These will be the majority of the navy commanders that other races or forces will encounter, as they are the most numerous, but in bigger fights, a higher command structure is needed. For those who manage to survive and ascend higher in the ranks, they become Lord Admirals, who lead the battle fleets, making them responsible for entire sectors. Their subordinates or successors are often known as Solar Admirals, which implies they deal with star systems, but I cannot be sure. That is pretty much as high as you can expect to get within the Imperial Navy, because there's only 5 people in higher places than the Lord Admirals. They are the Lord High Admirals, original naming I know, who will be given leadership of all Navy forces in one of the Segmentae Majoris, Solar, Tempestus, Pacificus, Obscurus, and Ultima, based on Mars, Barca, Hydrafer, Cipramundi, and Cardunyash, respectively. These 5 individuals are supposed to be all of equal standing, but the first among equals is often the Lord High Admiral of Segmentum Solar. This is perhaps of no surprise since, that's where Terra is. They, or whichever Lord High Admiral is selected at the time, are known as the Lord High Admiral of the Imperial Navy, and will sometimes be given a seat on the High Lords of Terra, overseeing the Navy's interest in all matters political, whilst all fleet matters are often dealt with by the other Lord High Admirals. As I say, other High Admirals can become the leader of the Navy, but it's most often given to the leader of Segmentum Solar. I'd love to tell you who these 5 individuals are, especially the overall current Lord High Commander of the Imperial Navy, Lord High Admiral, sorry. But sadly, we do not know their names or their histories. The only known individuals to take that highest of ranks are from M32, encompassing the War of the Beast and the beheading that followed it. We do know of some more recent segmentum commanders, but probably not the most current ones. For example, Zacharias Wrath was the Lord High Admiral of Segmentum Tempestus during the First Tyrannic War, but he sacrificed himself and his vessel, the Dominus Astra, in order to destroy the forces of High Fleet Behemoth. Jackson, with an X, was the High Admiral for Segmentum Solar, so he could well have been a High Lord, but it's not actually stated, as well as a Lord Commander Solar, one of the equivalent titles to War Master created following the Horus Heresy due to the connotations. But he was dismissed after a Night Lord's attack on a Ministorum training world only 100 light years from Terra. Assumedly they just decided he was incompetent and sacked him. The Imperial Navy's officers and crew are brave men and women all, critical in times of war, but they are not the most essential element for traversing the galaxy. That honour instead falls to the members of the Navis Nobilite, better known as Navigators. Navigators are essentially mutants, though the extent of their physical deformities varies wildly, with one defining trait: a third eye. It may well be that this was a deliberate mutation engineered during M22 and the Dark Age of technology, but it is a trait that is only passed on if both mother and father possess it. This eye, sometimes known as the warp eye, does not see in the physical realm, but rather sees the psychic light that forms the Astronomicon. With this ability, they can use the Astronomicon to guide ships through the warp, though this has its limits as the light goes dim and you get further away, such as during the Macarian Crusade. Therefore, navigators are technically psychers, but beyond being able to see the Astronomicon with the warp eye, they have no other known psychic abilities, which is a little bit odd. Oh, and don't look at said eye, because it will kill you, instantly and painfully. As a result of the necessary conditions for the Navigator gene to be passed on, the Navigator families and houses were formed. Many houses are allied, often through marriage or other things, but others are sworn enemies, and the 19-ish houses that we know of are broadly split into 4 categories. The magisterial houses are closest to the original families of Terra, and often still have holdings on the cradle of humanity. Nomadic houses are perhaps the most skilled of their kind, having abandoned planetary life almost entirely, but this makes them even more estranged from society than even other navigators. Shrouded houses are those seemingly in decline, lacking in resources, but their members are often extremely perceptive, at least with the warp eye, for reasons unknown. Finally, there are the renegade houses, those who have been exiled or abandoned due to ditching tradition or fighting other houses. Assumedly there's some arbitrary line you just don't cross on what counts as being rivaled with and actually fighting. This exile is probably enforced by the Pater Nova, the strongest of the navigators as well as their leader. But rather than them, it is instead their chief servant who represents the Navis Nobilite on the High Lords of Terra. Often living for 1,000 years, navigators often get to 400 on average, which is pretty good for a human, the most powerful of the houses are lined up as successors to the Pater Nova, known as heirs apparent. When the Pater Nova does eventually die, the heirs apparent go through a massive power boost and mutation, before they eventually seek out and kill each other until only one remains, becoming the next Pater Nova. There was in fact a time, during the Great Crusade, where the Navis Nobilite was threatened with becoming obsolete, mainly due to the Golden Throne and its twin Dark Glass and the project concerning them, that nearly removed the need for warp travel entirely because, let's just use the webway. It was of such import to the Pater Nova of the time, though we do not know their name or identity, sadly, that they attempted to destroy Dark Glass, actually succeeding and almost preventing the White Scars from reaching Terra during the Horus Heresy, though I believe that was completely by accident. Well, for their sake, I bloody well hope it was. The fleets of the Imperial Navy are comprised of numerous vessels from a variety of classes. There are 2 overarching classes of ships excluding the escort craft, battleships and cruisers, though within the cruiser class there are 4 subclasses. In ascending order, they are light cruisers, cruisers, battle cruisers, and grand cruisers. The light cruisers are commonly found in fleets, being the smallest of capital ships, and while they are not as hard-hitting as their older cousins, they are definitely faster and more agile, though don't take that to mean they can just turn on a sixpence or whatever the phrase is actually supposed to be. They are often used for recon as well as frontline engagements, but it is the cruisers themselves who make up most of the line, though as there are 5 classes of cruiser, even supposedly uniform battle lines will vary greatly. By that I don't mean, oh, there's 5 classes of cruisers overall. Even the cruiser class within the cruiser class has 5 subclasses. There's a lot of classes of ships, okay? Battle cruisers are the Imperial equivalent to glass cannons, though they are still incredibly resilient. It's the Imperium after all, as they pack guns usually reserved for battleships but are no tougher than a regular cruiser. The Grand Cruisers are much older and thus rarer, often now retired from frontline duty, but their noticeably larger hulls does mark any out that take to the field. Whilst new Grand Cruisers are still built, they've definitely piled on the power and plating in recent memory, and so now they fall into the category of battleships. These titanic warships are up to 8 kilometers long, or about 5 miles if you still use the old measurements, and are only built above the greatest of Forge Worlds. Despite their incredible resilience and firepower, the 8 classes of battleships and their 5-figure crew are often only deployed in larger engagements. To be fair, I wager they could win against small fleets of lighter craft on their own, but the Imperium probably just doesn't want to risk them due to the huge expenditure that's required to build them. The most common battleships are the Retributor and Emperor class vessels, known for incredible numbers of heavy ordnance and torpedoes in the former case, and large numbers of fighters in the latter. There are not actually that many classes of fighter or bomber, and they're stored on board the larger vessels and deployed for both offensive and defensive reasons. The Fury Interceptor is the main fighter, used to counter similar enemy units as well as bombers deployed by the enemy that would threaten the capital ships, and these fighters will also be used as escorts or guards for the Shark assault boats that instigate boarding actions. The Imperial Navy also has a contingent of atmospheric fighters, known as the Aeronautica Imperialis. These vessels include the Thunderbolt strike fighter, the Marauder bomber, and even the Valkyrie gunships that are so ubiquitous in the Astra Militarum. Valkyries are often attached to a regiment for a given engagement, still swearing allegiance to the Navy over the Guard. But if the two forces work together long enough, then modifications can be made, and supposedly the gunship can even be adopted by the regiment. I believe one example is the vessel Steel Eagle that belonged to the Katachan 22nd, if memory serves. Now, what's next? Wait, hang on. Wait, what was that? Oh, by the greater good. I'm seeing player fluctuations in the stealth fields, and if I keep them up, I may not be able to get back into the webway. I need to go. Sorry, Imperial Navy, guess we have to cut your story short, because if I keep talking, I'm going to be drowning in macro cannons and lance batteries, and I haven't put enough into the shields to do that. So, time to go. Alright, I think we're clear. For now. The webway may not be perfectly safe, but at least I'm not in the middle of a battle fleet anymore. I'm going to need to repair and modify the stealth generators before we go back into the material realm, so I think there will be a delay between me sending this recording and the next one, just because I don't know how much work this is going to require and my brain is completely frazzled right now. When we do get back on the road though, I'll be looking at a legion rather renowned for stealth and generally working in the dark, which will mark the halfway point of our legionary adventure. Blimey, that came around fast, didn't it? Thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis. Sorry for the quick departure. I'll see you all again. Goodbye.